little bit of Yep. So hard. Yeah.
I'm going to have you do the PowerPoint.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, if you want to email it to me, I'll click through it.
It's the same one that we did before.
Okay, great. Awesome.
Do you want me to still do that again?
Yeah, if you could just send it to me again so it gets to the top of my inbox.
Okay, and then it's toward the end. I'll say now there will be a PowerPoint.
Okay, gotcha.
Let me you won't see me for a little bit. I'll
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. So you can either sit down or standing at the podium. It's up to you. Okay, sounds good. And these mics, they don't turn off. So just stop. Well, I haven't been able to, it hasn't been picked up. Just.
All right.
Yeah, make sure that the mic. Yeah.
Is there an on? No, it's important.
Or Chairwoman Joe, she said she's. Forgot momentarily. I didn't have headphones.
So what was it?
The photograph. You know, so it's like all these different. So it actually was great. Visually very some sections. Completely different. But then like there were lots of yeah, it was good. Always. No. Yeah. Yeah, that was fun.
Spent 15 hours. My close friends and I have to do both. Something on word maybe. Someone's really fun too. Teams. Essentially, trying to do clue words, yes, target words, matches, words are like so you have to somehow find connection. And they have a picture version too. Really so picture version. Right. Always focus on such a
yeah, no, it was really fun. We played around after and just like playing. It's my son got it. He does, and I. My husband works. Thing I started.
So. That's all. You can come with me. It's just.
I'm very, I have some. Because to not put you on the spot, but Sarah's are involved. Whichever you feel.
Yeah, no, whichever you do.
Sure, yes, Sarah told me that.
No, it's fine.
Fine.
I'm happy to do that.
It's run by Richard is running this Taiwan program, so I have time to talk. Yeah, for a few minutes like that, sure.
Yeah, no, I'm good at that.
Cool. Thanks for coming.
Oh, no, right.
To how's it?
That's what we're doing.
Never know when.
You know.
Great.
It's like hang out. So there's like this. Play D&D for an hour. Salts. It's amazing. So I was at that aside. Social.
Shall we? Let's do.
Good afternoon. Thank you. All right, good to see everybody. Hi, welcome once again to the Seeger Center for Asian Studies and to yet another important talk on Taiwan. I am Eric Schlussel, Associate Professor of History and International Affairs, and I have the great privilege of being the director of the Seeger Center. The Seeger Center is not only the Comprehensive Asian Studies Center for GW, it is the largest and most active Asian Studies Center in the DC area. And we're especially pleased to say that our Taiwan programming is one of our great strengths here. Taiwan has a special place in our programming, in our hearts, and in our minds. And this today is just one of our 4 yearly sort of headliner events on Taiwan issues. We have 2 conferences and 2 roundtables. It is one of the roundtables. Very, very happy to have Sarah Newland and Wendy Chiu here. I must apologize that one of our other speakers has taken ill and will be unable to join us. But I'm really grateful that all of you are here and everyone who's joining us online. We'll see this video later on. What can I say? I won't delay this any further, but we'll turn things over to my assistant director, Richard Haddock, who's a proper Taiwan expert, and will be running the show today. So thanks all for coming, and take it away, Richard.
Well, thank you all for, it's pretty close. Thank you all for coming today, especially week after Thanksgiving, joining us today on a Monday morning to talk about, Monday afternoon now, to talk about a very important, growingly important topic, subnational diplomacy. My name is Richard Haddock. I'm the Assistant Director for the Seeger Center for Asian Studies. And I first wanted to just start off the talk actually by giving some thank yous to our Seeger Center team, Adam Bubinich, our program coordinator, as well as our student staff, Renee, Grace, Francis, Mark, and Selena, without whom these programs cannot be possible. As Eric mentioned, Matt Salmon unfortunately cannot join us, but we're still going to have we will have a robust conversation, and we'll try to bring elements from all sides of subnational diplomacy into our discussion today. Just a little bit about the Seeger Center. It's a longstanding, served a longstanding role as a forum for Taiwan affairs. Just last November, on the 18th, we had a conference on a pulse check on Taiwan's democratic institutions, where we analyzed domestic political discourse in Taiwan, as well as a check on the health of the democratic institutions in Taiwan following a year of a lot of change in Taiwan. Our center endeavors to take on Taiwan studies holistically, so we also hosted a series of events focusing on Taiwanese and Taiwanese American identities, including an event on Beyond Boba and food studies and identities. Please watch out for some exciting spring programming. We anticipate to host some events on Taiwan affairs, including assessing digital government developments in the Asia Pacific with a look at Taiwan, as well as assessing what the new administration in the US will do in the first 100 days vis-a-vis Taiwan and generally cross-strait relations. So please keep us in mind for our spring programming coming up. It'll always be exciting. So today's talk is on US-Taiwan subnational diplomacy. Now, subnational diplomacy is not new in US history of foreign relations. According to the Congressional Research Service, states and other subnational entities, including cities and counties, play a more prominent role in international relations than may generally be recognized. States have offices overseas and send trade and diplomatic delegations to other countries. Some states have imposed economic sanctions for human rights abuses, as well as writing pacts with foreign governments in the form of memorandums of understanding to encourage trade, environmentalism, tourism, and all sorts of ties and connections, and education. And that's certainly also the case for US-Taiwan connections. Since 2020, there's been a significant increase in US-Taiwan subnational diplomatic engagement, but by no means it has been happening far before 2020. But since 2020, starting off with the US-Taiwan Education Initiative that was announced, according to the 2024 US-Taiwan Education Fact Sheet, Taiwan has signed 26 educational MOUs with 24 US states. Ministry of Education of Taiwan invited education department officials and school administrations from these states to visit Taiwan in June and in November 2023. During their visits, the Ministry of Education hosted a Taiwan-US elementary and secondary school education exchange meeting, where educators and officials from both sides engaged in experiences, sharing experiences and promoting international education. The U.S. federal government, particularly the State Department and the Department of Education, has also encouraged U.S. states to expand educational cooperation with Taiwan. Taiwan has established a record high 66 Taiwan centers for Mandarin learning centers in the United States, as well as 103 Taiwan U.S. sister schools were established at the elementary and secondary level. The University Academic Alliance in Taiwan signed cooperation agreements with the University of Illinois System, the University of Texas System, and the Texas A&M University System. So in terms of education exchange, really since 2020, there's been such an increase and a boon to U.S.-Taiwan educational exchange that touches, again, on the subnational diplomatic elements. On the trade and economics front, currently there are 24 U.S. states as well, and inclusive of the territory of Guam, that have opened offices in Taiwan, a staggering growth since a low point of just 6 offices in 2020. Just this year in March, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer began a 5-day investment mission in Taiwan and South Korea. During the trip, Governor Whitmer announced the opening of a new Michigan-Taiwan office, focusing on securing investments in key industries like automotive, semiconductors, renewable energy, and advanced manufacturing. During the Michigan-Taiwan office opening reception, Governor Whitmer also celebrated the announcement of 3 investment projects by Taiwanese firms that are looking to make it in Michigan, primarily in automotive manufacturing as well as research and development. I also had the opportunity to speak at a conference in Oakland University in Michigan not long ago. The focus was on Taiwan Relations Act at 45, but I was personally impressed with the level of energetic interest that Michigan state senators and representatives have regarding building ties with Taiwan. State Representatives Jamie Green and Jason Morgan welcomed Director General of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in Chicago to Michigan State Capitol in June, and also sponsored a resolution that expresses the legislature's commitment to deepening ties between Michigan and Taiwan. The resolution was adopted in June. This is just one example of many states that are doing this kinds of increased subnational diplomatic engagement with Taiwan. At the same time, increased international engagement by states is accompanied with increased risks of malign interference or influence at the state and local level. Recently, one of the high-profile cases is a recent indictment of former New York State official Linda Sun, former Director of External Affairs for Global New York, for allegedly using her official position to benefit the People's Republic of China, and especially to block Taiwanese government and officials and representatives from being able to meet with New York state and local level public officials. Though this is not the only case, Sun's high-profile indictment is a recent moment that sheds light on the vulnerability of U.S. state and local governments to foreign influence, as well as to the nuances and difficulties of conducting international relations. So what this roundtable seeks to address is 2 topics. What's the broad history and current trends of U.S.-Taiwan subnational ties? And what are the successes and challenges to building and maintaining subnational ties at the operational level? So without further ado, I'll introduce our speakers. We will start with having our speakers giving presentations. Then we will move into moderated Q&A with the audience here, and we'll continue our conversation until around 2 p.m. So first, on my left, we have Sarah Newland, Assistant Professor of Government at Smith College, and is a scholar of local politics in China and Taiwan, and seeks to understand the behavior of local officials as domestic public servants and as actors in international relations. Her new work focuses on subnational diplomacy and in particular on the role that state and local officials play in the complicated relationships between the US, China, and Taiwan. Her work on US-Taiwan subnational engagement has been published in Pacific Review and is currently working on a book project with Kyle Jaros on US-China subnational diplomacy in an era of rising great power competition. Professor Newland is also a member of the US-Taiwan Next Generation Working Group and a fellow in the Public Intellectuals Program of the National Committee on US-China Relations. Previously, she was an assistant professor of political science at Villanova University and a China policy postdoctoral fellow at the Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation in the Harvard Kennedy School. Next, joining us online is Chairwoman Wen Jie-jo. She is the chairwoman for Phoenix Sister Cities, Taipei Sister Cities, as well as the chairperson for Phoenix Sister Cities' 11 International Sister Cities. Her specialties are global relations, public relations, and media relations. As chairwoman for Taipei Sister Cities, Taipei Sister Cities received the Best Sister Cities recognition from 2009 to 2012. Chairwoman Cho has been devoting, volunteering, contributing, and serving American, Asian, Taiwanese, and Chinese communities and Phoenix Sister Cities for over 25 years to promote education, STEM, sister schools, police and fire exchanges, youth ambassadors, global friendships, arts, culture, sports, business, solar energy, and even advanced technology. She's the founding executive board member and president for Global Federation of Chinese Businesswomen Arizona chapter, and she is currently the principal of Arizona Chinese Mandarin and Cultural Academy, as well as the executive director of the Taipei Culture Summer Camp. Chairwoman Cho received many awards, including the Arizona Martin Luther King Jr. Living the Dream Award, recipient of the Southern California and Arizona Outstanding Young Leader Award, U.S. Congress Congressional Recognition for Community Service, among many other public service recognitions. She graduated from Arizona State University, majoring in journalism and communications. We're really lucky to be joined by our speakers here today to talk about, again, the broad trends in U.S.-Taiwan subnational diplomacy, as well as what that looks like operationally. So first, I'd like to turn to Professor Sarah Newland. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks everyone for being here, and thanks for that nice welcome, Richard. So I want to kind of fill in a little background on some of the things that Richard started to introduce, and there are going to be a few sort of big takeaways from my comments today. So the first is that subnational diplomacy is a meaningful, important site of diplomacy and international exchange. I think sometimes it gets kind of dismissed as something that's only about supposedly sort of frivolous or meaningless person-to-person or cultural exchanges. But I think it's a really important place where international relationships and partnerships can be established, particularly in the context of the kind of complex geopolitical dynamics that affect the US-Taiwan relationship at the national level. The US and Taiwan are quite constrained in their ability to have things like formal diplomatic ties at the highest levels of government. But those constraints don't really extend to policymakers at the subnational level. And so for Taiwan in particular, subnational ties are an important place where continuing connections to the US can take place. And I think, you know, the importance of subnational ties is not limited to Taiwan. I'm sort of wearing a second hat this year as visiting senior fellow for US-China subnational relations at the Truman Center for National Policy, and we've been looking at city-level engagement with China. And, you know, I think one of the things that is clear from that work is that in some cases, even when tensions at the national level are high, subnational engagement can serve as an important way to maintain some channels for conversation when many of those channels at the federal level have closed. The second thing that I want to sort of highlight as a big takeaway is that subnational diplomacy has really been a high priority for the Taiwanese government since the 1970s. And the context of the 70s is important. That's when Taiwan's sort of place in the world began to really shift. In 1971, Taiwan lost the China seat in the United Nations. And that really it was kind of the start of Taiwan's increasing global isolation. Many countries at that point switched their formal diplomatic recognition to the People's Republic of China. And that was true of the US as well, starting in 1979. And so for Taiwan, it was really important to find some alternate ways to remain connected to the global community in light of its growing isolation at the formal state-to-state diplomatic level and in international organizations. And so it really invested heavily in subnational engagement with city and state policymakers, especially in the US, but elsewhere as well, as it was sort of trying to figure out a way to forestall diplomatic isolation in the context of this incredibly dramatic shift in its international status. For the US, I would say that subnational diplomacy has in general been a much lower priority. And, I think one of the things that's true, not just of the US's relationships with Taiwan subnationally, but just more generally, is that US cities and to a lesser degree states have quite a small staff for engaging in international affairs work. And they're limited in terms of both staff time and resources. And so, in general, for cities, this is not a major priority for them. But more generally, I think interest and engagement with Taiwan at the subnational level has really ebbed and flowed in the US. And it's ebbed and flowed in part because of whatever is happening in the US China relationship at that moment. So, moments when of subnational engagement with Taiwan um, are really strong tend to be moments when the US's relationship with China is somewhat tense, and moments when US interest in engagement with Taiwan is weaker tend to be moments when there's much more excitement or interest in engaging with China. Okay, so let me kind of fill in some of the details to support those sort of three big points. So, as I mentioned before, subnational diplomacy really has been a big priority for Taiwan since the 1970s. Many of the earliest sister state and sister city relationships between the US and Taiwan were formed in the late 1970s or in the 1980s. I believe we'll hear more about the Phoenix relationship, which I think was signed in 1979, if I'm correct. And so some of these first forms of engagement included sister state relationships between what was then the provincial Taiwan province government. It's sort of a holdover from the idea that Taiwan was a part of China and Taiwan province was one among the many provinces that the ROC government controlled. That sort of fiction has now been given up in reality. So there's no Taiwan province government separate from the Taiwan national government. But those sister state relationships have remained as ways to connect Taiwan as a whole to individual states within the US. And there are only a couple of states at this point that I think don't have that kind of sister state relationship. Many of those were formed in the 1980s. A lot of US cities also signed sister city relationships with Taiwan in the 1980s. And the sort of moments of subnational diplomacy then tend to beget other moments. So once states had signed a sister state relationship with Taiwan, then they were eligible for kind of subsidies and Taiwanese government support to establish a trade office, a state trade office in Taipei. And so over the course of the 1980s and 1990s, lots of states established these offices. These offices, depending on the kind of makeup, the political economy of a given state, their role may be more about sort of recruiting FDI from Taiwan to the state. It may be more about creating trade relationships where, components of a particular good that are produced in Taiwan are then brought into the supply chain of a manufacturer based in the state. In some cases, these offices really focus on agricultural exchange. So Taiwan is very dependent on agricultural exports from the US. Idaho wheat, a lot of Idaho wheat is sold and milled in Taiwan. That's a very strong state level relationship between Idaho and Taiwan, in part because of this sort of strong history of a relationship between Idaho wheat and the Taiwan kind of milling industry. And so different offices had different focuses, but many of these offices started to be established in the 1980s and 1990s. So that was really the kind of first high watermark of US Taiwan subnational diplomacy. There was a lot of interest in this on the US side. Local businesses, US businesses, were really eager to get into the markets of the kind of high growth East Asian economies. And so they were pushing governors to go to Taiwan, to South Korea, to Japan, to bring trade delegations, to establish trade offices there that would help businesses from that US state connect with partners in East Asia. And so there were a lot of governors' visits that to Taiwan, often sort of in connection to the opening of a trade office there. There also were really mixed feelings within the US about the decision at the national level to normalize relations with China in 1979. And in particular, in the Republican Party, there was a real fracture, right? Where, on the one hand, this process was initiated by a Republican president, Richard Nixon. On the other hand, there was a lot of anger at this sense that the Taiwanese government had been a sort of steadfast Cold War ally of the US and now was being kind of abandoned in the rush to normalize relations with the People's Republic of China. And so at the local level, politicians and community members were in some cases eager to establish relationships with the PRC, but in many cases were also saying, no, we have to show our displeasure at this national policy by sustaining a relationship with Taiwan at the state or local level. For Taiwan, this also was clearly a strategy that the government decided to invest heavily in. It was very unclear, I think, especially before the signing of the Taiwan Relations Act. It was quite unclear what the future of the US-Taiwan relationship was going to look like under these quite ambiguous documents about normalization of the US-China relationship. And so policymakers in Taiwan sort of fixated on engagement at the subnational level as a potentially productive way to move forward. I think they understood early on that cities and especially states are quite powerful in the US political structure, that often politicians rise up from lower level positions into positions of national influence. And so if you're able to kind of establish a relationship with someone at the state level, maybe that person will then move up to become a senator or even a president someday. And so they really invested in kind of winning the hearts and minds of politicians at the state and local level quite early. Starting in the early 2000s, there was a real decline in the kind of intensity of engagement between the US and Taiwan at the subnational level. In 2001, which was the year that China joined the WTO, the World Trade Organization, there were about 20 state trade offices in Taiwan. This was really the high water mark. But by 2016, there were only, by my count, 8 left. I think you said it went down to 6 at one point. And so a lot of these offices had been closed. Some forms of engagement remained strong. So Idaho kept shipping a lot of wheat to Taiwan, for instance. But governors largely stopped visiting Taiwan. And while there were a lot of sister city and sister state relationships on paper, many of those relationships became somewhat inactive. So some folks I've talked to have referred to them as sleeper sister cities. No one's actually gone to visit their partner or picked up the phone and talked to them in many years, even though they exist on paper. And I think on the Taiwan side, there was still a lot of interest in this form of engagement. But from 2008 to 2016, when President Ma Ying-jeou was in office, President Ma was really focused on strengthening the relationship with China. And so that was more of Taiwan's diplomatic focus than the kind of subnational engagement with the US at that point. And on the US side, this period after China joins the WTO is this moment of incredible excitement and optimism about US-China engagement. So US businesses are really eager to get into the Chinese market. The Chinese market is complicated to navigate, and so they're looking for help from governors, from state economic development agencies. And so some of the state trade offices in Taiwan begin to close and offices in China begin to open. Governors are visiting China. Now, very hard for that to imagine that happening, but it wasn't a kind of political minefield in 2004, 2005, the way it is today. Students were eager for opportunities to study abroad in China, so sister cities were often really focusing on those kind of educational and cultural person-to-person exchanges with China. That was where people wanted to be going. And so I think all of those things kind of led to a decline in interest in engagement, subnational engagement with Taiwan on the US side. Since 2016, and really especially as Richard highlighted, since 2020, since the pandemic, there has been a dramatic uptick in subnational US-Taiwan engagement. And I think we're really at a kind of second high water mark that is, if anything, exceeding what was happening in the 1980s and 1990s. So many of the old forms of engagement with Taiwan have now kind of undergone a resurgence. States are now kind of competing with each other to open trade offices in Taiwan, and there now are, between current and planned offices, the highest number ever. So nearly half of US states now have an office in Taiwan. 5 state governors visited Taiwan just in September and October of 2023 alone. There was a long period for basically the first decade of the 21st century. There weren't even 5 governors' visits to Taiwan in a whole year, right? So to have 5 governors visit in the span of about 5 weeks was really remarkable. Another thing that's remarkable is that now this is quite bipartisan. So the governors who went in that 5-week period included Democrats like Gretchen Whitmer, but also included Republicans. Support for Taiwan used to be more consistently Republican, and now it's really quite bipartisan. New sister city agreements have been signed in the last couple of years. Long Beach in California now has an agreement with Taoyuan. Rockville, Maryland has an Elon agreement. But in addition to a kind of resurgence of those old forms of subnational diplomacy, there also has been a lot of innovation and sort of new forms of engagement with Taiwan emerging. So driver's license reciprocity agreements are one example that I've been following. A majority of states now have an agreement where if you're a resident of that state and you move to Taiwan, or if you're a resident of Taiwan and you move to that state, you can very sort of easily and smoothly get a driver's license, a local driver's license. There also have been a number of Taiwan friendship caucuses in state legislatures and also in the Chicago City Council. These are modeled on the Senate and House Taiwan caucuses in the US Congress, but they're designed to be groups of state legislators who are declaring their desire to support Taiwan within the state legislature. There also, as Richard mentioned, has been a lot of educational engagement between both state, like departments of education, public universities, individual schools, or K-12 school districts with Taiwan through the US-Taiwan Educational Initiative. But then also just more generally, there have been a lot of kind of like signing of agreements. My sense is the Ministry of Education in Taiwan is extraordinarily busy. The office that handles this, very, very busy right now. A lot of interest in the US in, getting Taiwanese teachers to come and teach Mandarin, in creating opportunities for US students to go to Taiwan and study, really kind of two-way exchanges of both students and teachers. So I think several things are really motivating this new uptick in engagement. So first, there is clear kind of growing aggressiveness toward Taiwan by the PRC. And I think that is sparking new conversations at the local and the national level about the best ways to kind of protect Taiwan or to aid Taiwan. And also just sort of building like sympathy and interest in Taiwan. I've joked with a number of people recently that, it used to be the case that if you said Taiwan, people would say, "Oh, I love Thai food," and occasionally that still happens, but it happens a lot less than it used to. I think just like knowledge and interest in Taiwan is much higher in the U.S. than it used to be. On the US side, states, I think, are seeing clear economic benefits to engaging with Taiwan. Based on the interviews I've done, the TSMC investment, which is this multi-billion-dollar investment in Arizona, was something that really caught the attention of folks in state economic development agencies, where just the size of that investment, they said, why did Arizona get that? What can we do to get that kind of investment? And so that's part of what's motivating states to open trade offices in Taiwan, is their desire to be kind of eligible be a player for those kinds of giant investments. But it also is motivating things like new forms of educational exchange, where states want to train their students to be a workforce for the TSMC investment of the future. So they're interested in working with Taiwanese universities to try to figure out how you train a workforce that is going to go and work in these, incredibly important like high-tech enterprises, whether it's like working in a fab, whether it's working on software development, R&D. They want to be more closely connected to the Taiwan kind of knowledge economy. And there also, I think, is this context of sort of high US-China tensions right now. So visiting Taiwan, co-chairing a Taiwan Friendship Caucus, these are all things that, I think in some cases politicians are doing because they genuinely really love and care about Taiwan, but in some cases I think they're doing it as a way to sort of bolster their anti-China credentials. And, it's clear that some of the politicians who have visited Taiwan have national ambitions. And so for them, I think this is just one way to sort of say, like, look how anti-China I am. And at the state level, some of the same legislators who are sponsoring pro Taiwan resolutions are also doing things like sponsoring very anti China pieces of legislation. And so often those two things I think are going hand in hand. And then, I think there also is a way in which a variety of opportunities that used to exist in China have now really been closed off, and cities and states are looking for alternatives. So there are a number of universities that have canceled partnerships with universities in China, in some cases voluntarily, in some cases they've done so because the state legislature has required it or under pressure from Congress. So this is something that the Select Committee on the CCP has been investigating, as some public university relationships with China. So in some cases, those same universities now are signing agreements with Taiwan universities as a kind of direct replacement. The closure of the Confucius Institutes at universities around the US, I think, is another, important moment that created some real opportunities for Taiwan, where those Confucius Institutes were in some cases providing language instruction, in other cases providing sort of like China-related programming. They have essentially all been closed, but that need has not gone away, and the US government is not robustly funding Chinese language programs. And so the opportunity to partner with Taiwan, bring in Taiwanese trained language teachers, is something that universities see as really desirable. And then also, obviously, on the trade side, concerns about, Chinese involvement in supply chains, the desire to sort of decouple from China economically, that is encouraging US firms to look elsewhere. And so that also is kind of driving some of the desire for things like state trade offices. As states are saying, or as companies are saying, we really need state assistance in figuring out what to do next if we can't really be economically engaged with China in the way that we have been in the past. So I'll stop there. Happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Newland. Thank you for painting a very helpful overview of some of these larger trends, as well as some of the motivational factors we see historically as well as presently. And now to zoom in a bit more on the operational perspective on the energies and challenges and successes of managing subnational ties at the local level, we have Chairwoman Cho here. So Chairwoman Cho, please take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I am Wenqi Chu, very honored to be invited to this amazing event to join you for this important roundtable discussion about U.S.-Taiwan relations and diplomacy. I have devoted and volunteered in Phoenix sister cities for 30 years. Currently, I am the chairwoman of Phoenix 11 International Sister Cities and chairwoman of the Phoenix Taipei Sister Cities. Taipei Sister City is one of the oldest sister city with City of Phoenix, established in March 1979. Taipei Sister City is the most active sister cities and #1 sister cities that receive consecutive first place sister cities awards. Taipei Sister City play an important role as the bridge to tie and connect City of Phoenix and Taipei for a long-lasting great relationship, also help support and maintain good relationship with Taiwan and USA to promote arts, culture, education, business, high-tech, biotech, smart cities, and more. One of the major accomplishments for Taipei Sister Cities is helping to attract the TSMC $65 billion investment in Phoenix. That makes Arizona and Phoenix a leader in the semiconductor manufacturing industry, with leadership from Mayor Kay Gallego and former mayor and current U.S. Congressman Greg Stanton to secure TSMC's largest foreign investment in Arizona and United States. I am honored to travel and accompany both mayors to Taiwan in 2016 2019 and 2023. TSMC understands the significance of having a sister city that can active and can help promote people-to-people relationships. The investment is just the beginning of a hard work that Taipei sister cities will continue to build on to maintain, strengthen, and expand U.S. and Taiwan and Phoenix and Taipei relations. The U.S. and Taiwan have strong relationship that benefits everyone, such as in universities and colleges with teaching and studying exchanges, and there are TSMC apprenticeships training careers programs as well. I often feel that I am planting seeds, the seeds of culture, education, business, high-tech, biotech, smart cities, and people-to-people relationships. As years are caring and maintaining these important seeds, they will turn into blooming flowers and strong trees, just like the seeds I planted 30 years ago to see the fruits and growth of U.S. and Taiwan relationship today. The seeds I have planted can be found within the entire community from young to old. For this reason, I also feel that culture and education are essential factors in sister cities programs. Programs such as the award-winning Taipei Chinese Culture Summer Camp allow students to be immersed in Taiwanese culture, Youth Ambassador Exchange Program for young leaders to travel from Phoenix to Taipei to experience Taiwanese culture. Taipei Sister Cities Global Friendship Event to engage within international youth ambassadors in STEM sister schools between Phoenix and Taipei schools for exchange of ideas. So the future of U.S. and Taiwan will be even stronger because these relationships establish strong foundations. These events do not happen overnight. It took years of consistent hard work for building good, long-lasting relationships, creating connections, forming friendships, fostering international relations, promoting global ties, and achieving diverse exchange in areas of business and trade, arts and culture, youth and education, shareable, humanitarian, and municipality partnership for friendship, understanding, security, peace, and prosperity. All events require self-funding and manpower, which can be challenging, but perseverance, commitment, and determination can overcome these obstacles. Another challenge is when there are negative news, as an example such as the following. Taiwan is the heart of Asia and well known for its freedom and democracy. However, based on news report recently, and many people have questioned about the current crisis in Taiwan's democracy and justice system, due to the controversial of unjust and unfair detainment of Taiwan's third largest party chairman and former Taipei Mayor Ke Wen-je, without evidence and without charge since early September. U.S. is known as the leader in freedom and democracy in having separate but equal three branches of government. Sincerely hope that Taiwan will stay on the positive path to avoid political persecution, abuse of power during political opponents, and suppression of opposition parties, and be the true beacon of democracy in Asia. The ultimate goal is to practice the definition of diplomacy, which is to promote arts, science, economics, education, culture, and others while maintaining peaceful relationships. President Dwight D. Eisenhower established the Sister Cities program in 1956 to promote people-to-people diplomacy and cultural exchanges between the United States and other countries. President Eisenhower said, "You don't go to war with your friends," while discussing the concept of sister cities, highlighting the idea of that fostering personal connections between citizens of different nations can promote peace through citizens' diplomacy. I have a PowerPoint presentation to show you, introduce you to some of the Taipei Sister City events. Through events, we engage people-to-people relationships, unite the community, develop global views, outreach to the world, promote international business, and educate a younger generation regarding the importance of cultural awareness, diversity, and gain the global perspective of the world. So I can see the PowerPoint is in the back. We have diverse different events throughout the year to help promote Taiwan and US relationship. And it's kind of from the foundation of it, from hosting events such as with the TSMC families, and to having double tent celebration, to going with different school events as well. So as you can see here, we also was in, because TSMC is such an important part of Arizona, so we have a lot of events with them to help them settle down and of the environment in the US. So we have hosted a lot of different biotech companies from business all the way to education, as you can see there. So diplomacy from the ground comes from all aspects. We need to go from business to education, all ages and all interests. So for as a volunteer service, what we do is we try to capture everybody's interests. So of course, business is one of the interests that people like, of course, in education and all of the different components. So delegation that comes from Phoenix to Taipei or Taipei to Phoenix, we both host and organize. And then for municipality, for even the city of Phoenix, so we have firefighters exchanges, we have different type of exchange within the city as well. And there are, of course, special educations from students. So we have diverse student education programs through arts, through hands-on activities such as the summer camp that you'll see later on. So there are different diverse programs that allowed exchanges, because we feel that the students are our future. So we want them to have the open-mindedness. So having them to understand our sister cities, especially with Taiwan, it is a very important part of our programs. And we work really closely with the city. And of course, because we work so close with our city, we have good relationship with our city council. We have good relationship with our mayor as well. Arizona is also has a sister state with Taiwan. So we also are very good relationship with the governor, the state senator, and state house of representatives as well. And to build up on these type of relationships, every time that when there are different events, such as the Global Friendship event or different other events, we often will invite the different city and state officials to attend these wonderful events to tie the US and Taiwan relationship. So, like the Taipei Chinese Culture Summer Camp, it's not only just for Taiwan students or just the TSMC family students. We gather every student from their district, someone that they will be interacting daily when they're at school, so they can understand each other's backgrounds. And therefore, that's why one of the goals of Taipei Summer Camp is. So when they see them, they can understand each other, where they come from, what type of programs they have learned while they're in school in Taiwan. So the Taipei Summer Camp is a way of showcasing and bonding between the kids, the students together. When they play together, they can become friends together. So that's one of the goals of the camp as well. And everything's really hands-on with them, so they can really feel like the senses, to feel, to see, to touch, to taste of everything about the culture of Taiwan. And when they are able to immerse in that, they totally can understand where the students have come from, to know about their backgrounds. So all these are like the Taipei summer camp events. And some of these students, when we give them these opportunities, they never really experienced it before. They may seen it on YouTube, I may seen it on social media, but actually giving them the fan, giving them the lion dance, the yo-yos, it giving them an actual thing they can hold. Now they can actually feel it. So later on in life, when they grow up, when they talk about Taiwan relationships, they can remember back when they were a child going to the summer camp and having that experience. So that's one of what we do today. And of course, the sister city is very important. So we make sure that the opportunity is given to, of course, our elected officials as well. So we have delegation trips that takes the Phoenix mayor, like Hey Gallego, to meet up with the mayor of Taipei. We also have, in that particular program, we are establishing and tie together different business opportunities between Phoenix and Taipei. So things like the boba, for example, it's coming to Phoenix. And the very famous Ding Tai Fung is going to open up their sub store and restaurant in Arizona. So it's these type of relationship that we built up from the ground, from day to day, to help to be able to have more business opportunities as well. And just like you have said before, a lot of educational exchanges. We do a STEM exchange, youth ambassadors exchanges, different type of exchanges between the students. We want them to have that opportunity to basically see and feel what it is like in Taiwan. Yeah, and we also have like sister schools with Taipei and also with Phoenix. And we hosted different type of events, such as the hip hop dance, different events as well. So even like things like the tree planting event, something that the Taipei sister city would do to improve the environment. We want to make sure that it benefits the community. So especially in Arizona, when there's 115 degrees in the summer, it could be really hot concrete. Having adequate bulb shading is one of the most important things. So something that we do as sister cities as well is to tree planting, and it benefits everybody, the community, everybody else on there. Okay. Of course, we go from young to old. The older ones, we of course at universities, which do a lot of different outreaches. Some of them basically from preschool all the way to universities. When they have this idea, they wanted to learn more about Taiwan, we always go there and give them hands-on examples. What are some of the cultures of Taiwan? So this way, the students can have a global view of the world. And of course, different interests. But Taiwan is known for their tea. So we of course have a tea presentation. And we have award-winning artists, award-winning authors. So we wanted to showcase that to the public as well. And of course, everybody's favorite thing is like a pastime, but we wanted them to know, we taught them, of course, how to play mahjong at ASU. And of course, we want to do humanitarian work as well. We contributed to the Hospice of the Valley for their poncho program and support different events, as well as presented books to Congressman Greg Stanton's office as district, as well to different libraries as well. With TSMC coming to Arizona, some of them feels homesick. So we brought in the double 10th celebration as to celebrate, of course, double 10th. In addition, we also have like a night market environment. So they're there to enjoy the fireworks, enjoy the people, and have a little bit of piece of home here in Arizona. So it's like a little night market area that we popped up. Yeah. So it's very honor for me to share this works with you. To strengthen the global citizens diplomacy. We wanted to educate the younger generation to become leaders of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. I'm just really astounded. One of the takeaways I have from that is the comprehensiveness of engagement, really at all levels, at social level, as a public diplomacy practitioner and studier myself. I'm very encouraged to see this kind of engagement taking place, even down to bringing another Din Tai Fung franchise to Arizona. So that's very exciting. So now we're going to move to our Q&A period. Taking prerogative as moderator, I'm going to prompt each of our speakers with one question to start a conversation rolling, and it'll also give audience members a chance to think up of some questions. But after I prompt our speakers with questions and we respond, then we'll turn it over to you, the audience, to raise questions. So please start writing down some questions if you haven't done so already. So first question I want to prompt to Dr. Newland is, kind of to address what perhaps Matt Salmon might have talked about if he were joining us today, is Congress, particularly U.S. Congress and federal government relations with states as it regards to foreign policy or foreign affairs. So what are some of the gray areas legally, constitutionally, or some trends or changes that you're watching between how Congress and federal government interacts with states and cities that want to do more, specifically with Taiwan, but in generally acting more in the foreign policy space, just because the Constitution gives federal government primary power to manage U.S. foreign relations. According to analysis from Congressional Research Service, there is this kind of a gray area whether or not states and cities actually report as much as they should, or if there's this kind of a gray area that we're operating on, or if it in fact is a lot clearer than perhaps I'm thinking. So if you wouldn't mind maybe commenting on that first, and then I'll turn a question over to Chairwoman Cho. So Sarah, if you have anything.
Yeah, so in the couple of years that I have been really focused primarily on research on subnational diplomacy, I get asked a version of this question a lot, which is, well, why are states doing anything involving foreign affairs or international affairs, right? Isn't that the job of Congress? And I think there are really some questions, I think, that are real questions about some state legislation that seems like it's really focused on kind of security or foreign policy issues that, perhaps really ought to be handled at the national level. So, one example that I'm really following closely in my work on subnational engagement with and policy toward China is the rise of land bans across, there's some version of a land ban bill across, I think, most US states at this point. Depending on the bill, they ban Chinese companies, or in some cases, individual Chinese citizens from buying land, including like a house, in, the sort of land within the state that is within X number of miles of critical infrastructure, military facilities, things like that. Some of these bills are quite wide ranging, right? Very broad in their focus. So in Florida, for instance, the geography of Florida and the way that the state law is written means that a Chinese citizen essentially can't buy a house in the city of Jacksonville, even if they are, say, a professor at the University of North Florida, can't buy a house. So, things like that. I think if there is really a danger to like an individual Chinese citizen owning a house in a city in Florida, that seems like something that should be addressed nationally rather than through a sort of patchwork of inconsistent state laws. But that said, in terms of things like economic engagement, educational engagement, these are, forms of state power, right? States have a lot of economic authority. They have a lot of authority over their own educational systems within the US federal model. And so it's kind of long been an accepted practice that state governors go out and they try to recruit business abroad, or whether it's recruiting FDI to their state or helping local businesses establish kind of trade relationships or other economic relationships. This is something that has been longstanding practice now for 50 years, and in some cases examples past that. So I think there are real questions that I'll leave to sort of constitutional scholars about, how much really, if the federal government decided to try to restrict these kinds of relationships in a more dramatic way, like how much they could do. I'm not sure. Right now, if the mood in Congress, I think, is very supportive of Taiwan in a bipartisan way. I think the debates are over what the best kind of support for Taiwan looks like, and some of the proposals coming out of some members of Congress, I think other people think actually would endanger Taiwan rather than making it safer. So proposals to, de-recognize the PRC and recognize Taiwan as a country, things like that, I think are quite inflammatory, but they're, being some members of Congress are saying this is the best way to keep Taiwan safe. So, I think Congress on the whole is unlikely to do anything to restrict subnational engagement with Taiwan, right? It's, I think, consistent with the goals of many members of Congress. What they are seeking to restrict is subnational engagement with China. So there's a bill that would require congressional oversight of sister city relationships with Chinese cities, for instance. And some states have actually started. So Indiana now has a law that you can't establish new sister city relationships with Chinese cities. There's been some discussion around whether Russian sister city arrangements should be canceled in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And as the chairwoman was saying, I think part of the idea of the Sister City program, or Sister Cities International, the organization, when it was established, was that these are relationships that could and should exist to connect people, even in the context of the Cold War, right? That they were a way of connecting people when sort of geopolitical conversations were not possible, that perhaps person to person cultural and economic and educational exchanges could still be possible and could serve as an enduring and lasting basis for peace. So, I think that there are reasons to think that, sort of with one fell swoop, trying to cancel relationships with, hostile countries or with countries that are perceived as an adversary, that might not be the best move. But that is something that seems plausible to me, that a law like that could pass Congress. And, it's certainly, it's a little hard to know what President-elect Trump's China policy will look like, but it's certainly plausible that he would pass that kind of law. So short answer, like, I don't think Congress will do very much to restrict subnational engagement with Taiwan, but I could imagine them moving to more generally exercise greater oversight over subnational international affairs.
Great, thank you. And on to Chairwoman Cho. The question I have is kind of rooted in some operational experience that I have in local level engagement for international relations. I used to work at World Affairs Council of Central Florida, and there are lots of World Affairs Councils throughout the U.S. And what we used to do is to collaborate with State Department's International Visitor Leadership Program, IVLP, essentially to host international interlocutors, officers, folks who work in public recs offices and libraries, conservationists, to meet with their counterparts in different U.S. cities. So we were responsible for Orlando or the Central Florida area. But one area that I personally found to be difficult, that I'm really impressed with everything that the chairwoman has shared, is sustaining those local level connections, specifically between offices that are locally based as well as offices abroad, and for example, counterparts in Taiwan. So I wanted to ask Chairwoman Cho, what does cooperation or coordination at the local level really look like to maintain some of these exchanges that they can exist beyond maybe like a one-time visit? I think we saw firefighters exchange, we saw the public park ceremony as well as just some examples. But what do you see are some of the challenges or successes when it comes to coordinating and sustaining some of these local office level exchanges or engagements between Phoenix or Arizona in general from your experience, as well as cities in Taiwan? Thank you.
Thank you. Um, there are challenges and there are, of course, positive. For the challenges part of it is, of course, some of these events, like you said before, they don't have funding. Especially with sister cities, they don't have enough adequate staffing. We might have one staff, but we have, like for us, for example, we have 2 full-time staff, and then we have part-time staff, but we have 11 sister cities. And that could be very, especially if you're an active sister city like Taipei, that's a lot of work for one of real representative that they give you as a staff. But that is one of the challenges as well. And of course, with us for a city of Phoenix, we don't have budgets. Any type of events, such as the Taipei Summer Camp, it has to be self-funding. We could get it whether from your own pocket, or you can have to get the funding from like a sponsor or someone, like asking your aunts and uncles for money, or kicking it out of your own pocket. That is one of some of the challenges, and it is one of those reasons, like some of the sisters city, they can't do as many events because they don't have that budget and manpower to put together. But for the success part of it is that you have to keep up with a good relationship with your, whether it's city officials or with state officials. When they have an event, like say a coffee chat, when they have like a Christmas tree lighting ceremony, or when they have such an event as well, you have to be there to show your support as well. You can't just ask and not return. What we do is that we build up those relationships. Not only just so you have to come to my event, but I also come to your event. I also support you and the way that you need to. So if something that they need, we support that each other. We also have to maintain the interest. The interest is something that a lot of people might just do one time, say, oh, no, because it might be too hard. We wanted to make that interest, like, for example, the relationship with the youth ambassadors. That takes up a lot of work. We had to do the process of application. We had to do making sure the interviews, and of course, doing all of their scheduling. That could be a lot of hard work, but you have to maintain that and build up that relationship. So we start off with those that are in younger generations to make sure that there's all the interest that they want. So like the youth ambassador, so we can build that up. Not only that we have that group, but we make sure the younger generation, the younger ones know. So we promote that while they're in elementary school. Okay, we promote those events, and then we captured all type of interests. Some people may not like traveling, but they may like doing, like, for example, enjoy tea. So we brought in those concepts as well. It's kind of like not everybody can travel abroad. We have to financially travel abroad, but we bring that piece to you in Phoenix. I hope I've answered some of that question.
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, the resources, financial, personnel, as well as the interest, the motivation. Uh, the first time I went to Taiwan, I'm from Central Florida, and Tainan is a sister city of Orlando, established in 1982. As far as I could tell from the Orlando website, the first, at least active sister city relationship of Orlando. So I thought it was destiny that I first go to Tainan. And I had the opportunity through just being insistently asking, can I visit, to visit the Tainan city government to see what kind of engagement exists between Orlando and Tainan. Speaking frankly, at that time, I just had no idea that there was such a relationship or that there are these connections that might have been long lasting. But as Dr. Newland mentioned before, maybe something that is almost like a sleeper sister city relationship or something that ebbs and flows over time. And I remember visiting the city government office. It's just one individual who has to be, at that time at least, responsible for these kinds of sister city connections. And so to have to balance this one random request of someone saying, hey, let's do more with Central Florida with all of the other priorities of the office, international engagement, and otherwise, I can. It was a sobering introduction, I suppose, at that time to the administrative limits of personnel, of human resources, financial resources, motivation. So all these come together and are really felt acutely at the local level. So thank you very much for unpacking that for us.
Thank you.
So now I'd like to turn it over to the audience for questions. And I'll take this chance first to invite if there are any GW students among us who have a question first. I'd like to give you a chance to ask before we turn it over to our public audiences. So is there a student who'd like to raise a question first? A Georgetown student. Yeah, please go ahead. Welcome. Yes. Oh, sorry. Wait for the mic, and please, if you wouldn't mind identifying yourself before you ask your question, so we know you are, and keep your questions just to a question, please. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Alan Zhou. I'm an undergrad at Georgetown. Speaking of Tainan, Tainan is a sister city of one of the South Korea's major city, Gwangju, and the main boulevard in Gwangju is called Tainan Boulevard. And on the boulevard right now, there's a consul general of PRC, which used to be the consul general of ROC Taiwan until the year 1992. With that being said, any lessons of U.S.-Taiwan relationship, an official but substantial relationship, as backed by Taiwan Relations Act, could teach us lessons for engagement between Taiwan and South Korea or Taiwan and Japan? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, and if I could just add a little bit to that too, in Chairwoman Cho, your presentation, I couldn't help but notice there was some engagement between U.S.-Taiwan, is it Ireland maybe, and U.S.-Taiwan, South Korea at some point too. I was really interested to see your experiences with subnational diplomacy with U.S., Taiwan, and other countries as well, maybe to expand on South Korea, Japan, or other countries. So, open question to both of you to give any perspectives. Sarah?
Yeah, so the degree to which subnational diplomacy can serve as like a productive venue for engagement with Taiwan really varies country to country. And I think part of it is like in the US, because we have a federal system, there is a lot of autonomy at the state and local level that enables governors and mayors to play a real role in international affairs. In a country that has a more centralized political structure where, the governor is sort of working at the behest of national leaders and accountable to them rather than accountable directly to local constituents, or where localities just don't have any authority to, engage internationally, there isn't as much room for this kind of engagement. So, I think Taiwan has been effective at establishing these kinds of relationships with a growing number of countries. So I'd mentioned the driver's license reciprocity agreements. Those now exist between or I'm not sure if it's most, but many Canadian provinces and Taiwan as well. Taiwan has had a lot of success in building subnational relationships across East and Central Europe in recent years. So that's been a kind of growing source of support. So certainly I think it depends a lot, and I'm not familiar enough with the sort of subnational governance structure in South Korea to comment on how productive those relationships could be. But, this certainly is a kind of tie that Taiwan has with localities in Japan as well. And, I think can be productive. The resource limitations here obviously are real. This is a form of diplomacy that Taiwan invests in to a greater degree than many countries, but it also is trying to hold on to its shrinking list of formal diplomatic allies and, to build other forms of engagement at the national as well as the subnational level. And, so things like the demands for Taiwanese teachers to go and teach Mandarin in places like the US, as it's become so much more difficult to have educational partnerships with teachers or with schools in the PRC. In some ways, I think like both on the Taiwan side and on the US side, those programs are running into just resource limitations. Like there's only so much manpower at the Ministry of Education. There's only so many teachers who can go to both places, and so I think that those kinds of like practical limitations are a real issue, not just for Taiwan, but for lots of its potential partners.
And Chairwoman, did you have any perspectives on that broader question?
With City of Phoenix, we do have 11 sister cities. And one of our sister cities is for Suwon, Korea. And we have, of course, Himeji, Japan. Within our sister city, our 11 sister cities work closely together because we want it to be the friendship of all the sister cities. For example, all of us held together a 5K race. We have international kind of like a mayor's gala, which all the sister cities come together. Our whole goal is to try to be friends with one another and not to create any type of conflict.
That's great. Thanks so much for your perspectives. And now I'd like to open it up to the audience. If there's any questions, please. Okay, she was first. Then please go ahead. Wait for the microphone.
Hello, my name is Jessica Baker. I'm not a current student, but an alum from Johns Hopkins. The gentleman behind me stole my question about the subnational interactions with other Pacific countries. But I do have another question. The TSMC projects in Arizona are really new. But it's my understanding from your presentation that actually the business connections in Arizona have been there for a long time. I'm guessing that strongly maybe with Intel, and I'd want to know if either of you have anything to add about how those business relationships grew, how they were started in Arizona.
Thank you for the question. Chairwoman Sarah, if you wanted to start off with your insights on those business connections, how they developed.
Our City of Phoenix economic relationship has been trying to have more broader business opportunities with Taiwan. So they have been investing manpower and research regarding TSMC. It is with the Mayor Kate Gallego, when I accompanied her to Taiwan, she was able to sit down with the TSMC president and talked about TSMC in Arizona. And she has a background on planning and development. It was her that she was able to address his questions, like without having a staff, she can direct it herself. And so TSMC felt that the mayor is very supportive of this event. That's one of the reasons that TSMC has chosen Arizona for their hub. The goal of Arizona is try to become the semiconductor city, the semiconductor state. So we wanted to work with both all aspects, TSMC and Intel and everybody, for our economic growth in Arizona. Yeah.
And Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to add?
So I have obviously much less knowledge about the Arizona case in particular than Chairwoman Chiu does. But, I think one of the things that I would say states are sort of competing on is talking about who's working there and what the labor laws are, right? And what sort of resources are available. So one thing I've heard from, a number of folks who work in economic development positions is that they see the choice of Arizona as a somewhat crazy choice because of the water constraints, right? That semiconductor production is very, very water intensive. And so to make this big investment in the desert was surprising. And so, I've talked to some folks who've said, oh, like my state's climate is actually much better for this. And we also have, a highly educated workforce. I think in some cases, concerns around the role that the unions will play depending on union strength in a state is another kind of consideration for companies that are considering any kind of large scale investment. So it will be interesting to see, like, it's clear that the TSMC investment got a lot of states' interest and started to get them thinking about, like, what can we do to win investments of comparable size. But I think as the chairwoman is highlighting, like, this relationship didn't come out of nowhere. And so if you're just starting to think about that now in 2024, at the same time that 20 other states are thinking about how to compete for the next TSMC investment, that's like a different problem to solve, or a more complicated problem to solve maybe than TSMC starting to think about, or Arizona starting to think about that problem 8 years ago, right?
And something else that caught my attention from the chairwoman's response too is the mayor's ability to address questions and needs on her own because of her own technical knowledge and capabilities. And in terms of maybe for relationship building, that can be something that can really help things move along, is that there's a shared language of professional background that's able to help build trust between entities trying to set up something together. So I don't know if that's anything there, but that caught my attention as well. That's kind of a shared fluency of a technical language. Other questions? Thank you. Great questions so far. Yes, right here.
Thank you. My name is Max Boucher with the Truman Center. My question is for both panelists. If any, what kind of backlash from the PRC might follow US local government's engagement with Taiwan? Thank you.
Great question. Sarah, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So there's a real range. So some cities report no backlash at all. I think the sort of modal, most common experience is the nastygram, right? Like the letter expressing anger and discontent from the local consulate, or sometimes from the Chinese embassy saying, we don't want you to engage with Taiwan, and the US has a one China policy. Um, I think one of the things that is clear from, talking to folks both in large cities with a lot of international experience and in smaller cities is that many of the larger cities with the more professionalized international affairs staffs, they just accept the letter, they know it's coming, and they say, we're going to engage with both China and Taiwan. And, if Chinese diplomats want to not come to our holiday party, or if they want to not do something with us, like, that's their choice, but we're still going to engage with both sides. We have the authority to do so. We're not in violation of US policy, and they leave it at that. I think sometimes for smaller cities that don't have a great depth of international experience, that don't have like a full-time international affairs staff, they receive a letter and they're a little bit cowed by it. And, there are some things that Chinese officials have done that I think are quite sort of sneaky. So one example is writing the language of China's one China principle. So this is the Chinese government's idea that there's only one China and Taiwan is a part of China, sort of writing that into the sister city agreements that then are presented to US cities to sign. And US cities are sometimes told, oh, this is like a statement of US policy, or just signing boilerplate language, which of course they're not signing, they're signing Chinese government language. And then if they try to engage with Taiwan, their Chinese sister city partners go to them with this document and say, you promised not to engage with Taiwan, like you already have a Chinese sister city and it's us. You can't form this sister city relationship with a city in Taiwan. And that is the kind of thing that I think makes it really important for cities to share knowledge with each other, and also makes it important for sort of coordination mechanisms. So the Subnational Diplomacy Unit at the State Department can do some of this work of coordination and sort of knowledge sharing between cities, helping cities understand what other cities have been able to do, for instance. But cities also need to talk to each other about the fact that, often if Chinese government officials make threats, they can ignore those threats and like it's okay, right? And they can just sort of hold the line on saying, nope, like both, representatives from both of our sister cities will be invited to the party, and that's that. And you can choose to come or not come, but that we're gonna engage with both sides. I think that's really important, and it's something that cities and states are in some ways in a better position to do because they're not constrained by the sort of constraints on federal policy that really do make it very, very difficult for officials. In the executive branch in particular, at the highest levels to engage with Taiwan, that's very difficult. But that's not the case for like a city mayor. They can meet with officials from Taiwan, they can meet with officials from China, and they're not in violation of US policy if they do that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that there's, the sort of like versions of angry messages, sometimes threats, that, oh, we're going to pull out, we're going to like, not, I don't know, we're going to pull out investment from your state if your governor goes to Taiwan. Like that's something else that some states have received messaging about. There also are some examples of sort of carrots and sticks where Chinese officials will say, well, if you don't sign a sister city relationship with a Taiwanese city, you can pick like any city in China and sign a relationship with them instead. Or, oh, if you close your trade office in Taiwan and open one in China instead, we'll give you some benefit. So there often are those kinds of promises. It's not clear that the promises actually get followed through on. And often it's not true. It's not necessarily clear that the threats get followed through on either. Like sometimes the threat happens, the US actor decides to engage with Taiwan anyway, and like it's fine.
And Chairwoman, did you have any experiences or thoughts you wanted to share on this question as well?
Similar to what I had said before, we did sometimes we'll get letters showing that they're unhappy about certain events, but we do have a very strong international staff that receives it. And basically they show them that we will be featuring both cities because both of our sister cities. So we do have similar cases that happen within just the city of Phoenix. But for the people-to-people relationship part of it, when there are events that are held by Taiwan, like the Taipei committees, or when we have a sister city with Chengdu committees, we have no conflict. Within the people-to-people part of it, there's never conflict. When we have ambassadors that come from international, we have no conflict. I think it's only conflicting when it's above, when there's too much talk about politics and within higher levels. But what I see with the people-to-people part of it, we try to be very friendly.
That's an important note to land on as well. Just a quick follow-up question to this question raised. Thank you for raising it. To what extent do both of you see Taiwan policy and U.S. policy toward Taiwan and toward China being communicated, conveyed, or coordinated between maybe federal branches of government and local city level? Really, the heart of the question is how are local or state officials being trained, if at all? Are there resources that are voluntarily given or preemptively given to try to address some of these questions beforehand, or is there not really a coordination at this level happening? So both or either of you, if you have thoughts on that.
There's some guidance that gets sent out every year by the State Department to governors' offices and also, I believe, to mayors of large cities. But it's pretty short and focused on what US policy toward Taiwan is. And so I think it's difficult at that level in terms of like a document that's going to lots and lots of different places to give really concrete guidance about what you can and can't do in like a specific instance. I mentioned before the Subnational Diplomacy Unit. I think they're trying to serve as a kind of really important clearinghouse for sort of connecting localities with resources and information. My sense is a lot of the questions that they get are about engagement with China and Taiwan, and so that's become a big focus, but that office is small. And I think that there are some ways in which informal knowledge sharing can happen through things like networks of different cities that might connect officials from a set of cities to talk about a specific issue. I've heard about state legislators learning. So the Taiwanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs brings U.S. state legislators over to Taiwan on sort of study tours, visits, and those are often groupings of state legislators from multiple U.S. states. And so I've heard about those as actually an important information sharing opportunity for legislators from multiple states who are traveling together in Taiwan and maybe learn through that. Oh, in our state, we set up a Taiwan Friendship Caucus in the state legislature. Oh, what did that look like? And so those can actually serve as important opportunities. I think arguably there should be more opportunities like that created within the US as well. It shouldn't be dependent on a foreign government like bringing, US state legislators over for them to have those opportunities for knowledge sharing. So definitely, I think more like it would be better if there were more opportunities for that kind of knowledge sharing. I'll highlight one other thing, which is that there's now a program to bring mid-career foreign service officers into a small number of US cities for a year to kind of serve as international affairs staff within those city governments. And so the idea is to kind of enable two-way communication. They learn about what's happening at the city level in terms of engagement, and they can also bring some insights from the State Department into city government. That program right now, I think, is only in like 4 or 6 US cities, but those are foreign service officers who will serve for a full year. And so that's another, I think, productive way of trying to kind of share knowledge between the federal government and local governments.
That's a very exciting program. Chairwoman, did you have any experience or thoughts on that question on how cities are or local level are kind of learning or sharing resources on U.S. policy toward Taiwan?
Yeah, we also like if we have anything, we have the international sister cities. So that's also one of the places that if we needed some guidance, there's always going to be there as well.
I see, thank you. And we have back here a question.
Thank you so much for organizing such a wonderful event. I'm Riho Aizawa, research fellow at the Japanese Ministry of Defense and used to be Elliott School student. And I'm not sure it's still within the scope of subnational diplomacy, but I would like to know if there is any interaction or exchange between US state level National Guard units or police officers and their counterparts in Taiwan.
Interesting question. Sarah, Chairwoman, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I can't speak about this in a ton of detail, but I do believe there have been Taiwanese military personnel who have trained with US state National Guard units.
Actually, Chairwoman, we did see like the collaboration with firefighters, I believe. Are there other similar collaborations between maybe first responders between Phoenix, Arizona, and localities in Taiwan?
We have, in addition to the firefighter exchange, we do have, Taipei has invited our police and fire and homeland security from the city of Phoenix to go to some of their kind of like a conference in Taiwan as well. It's kind of like a mutual exchanges. Our biggest and our strongest ones is our firefighters exchanges.
I see. That's very interesting. Thanks for the question. And David, did I see your hand up earlier? No? Okay, sorry. That was a mislook. But we're just about out of time. So I'll take this opportunity just to conclude the event and to highlight some of the main points here of subnational diplomacy has long been happening. But for US Taiwan, there are these ebb and flow periods, and we're hoping to see some more sustaining conditions in the future. But we're able to learn a bit more about some of the operational challenges, as well as get a glimpse at the broader trends in subnational diplomacy between US and Taiwan. So thank you everyone for joining us on the Monday after Thanksgiving. Thanks for joining our conversation today. Please join me in thanking our excellent speakers today. So thanks again, and hope you have a great rest of your week. We'll be around here for a little bit, so please feel free to stick around. Thanks again.